Hi guys, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join me today. I will warn you, I talk a little fast, especially when I'm really excited, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. I don't want to just kind of tease you with Painter. I want to be able to show you some of the good gold nuggets and hearts and guts of it to show you how you can implement it immediately. So if you've got Painter, fantastic. If you don't, Corel does offer a 30-day free trial at www.corel.com. As Tanya said earlier, unfortunately, I can't see the chat log, so hello, I really appreciate you guys. Let's see. I want to give a shout out to Judy Reinford at judyreinfordphotography.com, so thank you so much. We will be using your beautiful image today, and let's get into it. So I am working in Corel Painter 2016. I will be on a Mac, so if I give you any kind of shortcuts with Command plus whatever, I'm working in Mac terms. If you're working on a PC, just think of the shortcuts for Command as Control. Now I've got Corel Painter all laid out, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just to let you know, any palettes, all these gray boxes, all this functionality can be found under Window. So if you've got a check mark next to it, it means it's open somewhere. And we've got a lot of palettes. We've got over 700 brushes. I'm going to try to simplify it as much as I possibly can today. And I have taken the liberty of pulling out some of my favorite brushes that actually come with Painter, but I've tweaked them a little bit so they're kind of more user-friendly for this style of painting. And somehow we're going to find a way to be able to get these brushes to you so you don't have to take any notes on brush settings. They're all going to be all ready for you to use immediately. And those are going to only be working for Corel Painter 2016, and I'll write a note on how to install them. It's very easy. So there are some beautiful things about Painter if you've never seen this program before. And I'm going to pull up a brush here. You can do three things with Painter essentially. You know, we can paint color, we can take a blender, let's take this blend, let me make sure it's in blend mode, or we can blend color, or one of the most exciting things which makes Painter worth every penny is we can do what's called cloning. So let me open up our image that we're going to be working on. We've got Miss Judy's beautiful image here, and I'll explain what cloning is in just a second. We're going to do File Clone, and I'm going to clear my canvas. So what cloning offers that other programs do not is the ability to load your brush instead of color. We can load our brush with let's do Smeary Round here, with image. So instead of putting down brush strokes of color that we pick from our color wheel, cloning allows us to load the brush with a portrait or a photograph. And then as we lay down brush strokes, it applies that photograph in the style of this brush. So essentially we have 700 different cloners. Most brushes can be used as cloners. If you want to toggle between having control over putting down color or making it into clone mode, we find that on our color wheel. So we've got this little icon. When it's in full color like this, we actually determine what colors to put down. But if we click on that clone stamp icon, you'll see it grays out. It doesn't matter where we are on that color wheel, but it will now allow us to paint with an image. And this is huge because now we don't have to paint freehand. There's no guessing involved. The most guesswork that you need to do is determine what brush do I use and how do I use it, and that's what I'm going to clear up today. So just keep that in mind. Cloning is an incredible capability that Corel Painter offers, and it's very different from the term cloning that you get in other software that's well known. It's very, very different. So with that said, let me go back to this screen here. And I want to kind of break down some things for you. So first of all, I have got all of my preferences and everything laid out according to my Intro to Painter DVD on my website. And that would take probably about 40 minutes to explain, so we're going to bypass all of that. But the really important thing you need to know, we're going to find up in Corel Painter, Preferences, and we're going to go to Interface. So Interface, I would highly recommend changing your cursor type to Brush Ghost. That way you can actually see what nib your brush is using. And when you watch this replay and then set up Painter alongside, it'll look the same. As we work our way down, I'm going to use units to inches. I don't change the brush icons, but the default mode I'm going to put to single document. And then the layouts, I'm going to put vertical double for this top one. So since this will be recorded and replayed, you guys don't really have to take crazy notes. I'm going to hit OK. And Painter's going to remember those preferences until it either crashes, or we want to change it, or our computer dies. The other thing that you have to keep in mind here is we do have color management in Painter, just like other programs. So you want to make sure that your color management is the same between any programs you're using. So Lightroom or Bridge or Photoshop and Painter, they should all line up. So you'll find that under Canvas, Color Management Settings. And the one thing we're really going to be watching out for is this default RGB. So let me go to default here. Now the default RGB, this is the big one we're going to worry about. The generic worldwide standard for color is this sRGB, IEC, blah, 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 nothing on the end. This is what most labs use standard. It's worldwide, everybody's got it. If for some bizarre reason you don't see this on your computer, the next best thing is this guy right here with BPC, with black point compensation. It's close, but it's not quite the same. So if you have this, great. Now if you're photographing or capturing an Adobe RGB, you really want to be on this one, Adobe RGB 1998. Now since this image that came in is sRGB, I need to make sure that I go back to sRGB. Now another thing is I always ask when opening these profile mismatches. I'm going to hit OK. That way if I open up an image that's in a different color profile, Painter's going to send up an error message and go, wait a minute, this is not the profile you set up, what do you want me to do with it? So we're all set up there. We've got a nice little blank sheet open. I've tweaked all of my palettes. I've moved out what I need. And I try to keep a really simple workspace. So to be a minimalist, I have my toolbar, my color wheel, my brushes palette, my layers palette, my brush calibration. We probably won't work with that too much, but that stays out. Clone source, and our custom palette of brushes. You guys are going to get all these goodies, so we don't have to spend a lot of time showing how to set these up. And all of these palettes, again, are found under Window. So they have the check mark next to them, which means they're out here somewhere. Now what's also cool is if you click on the right top part of these palettes, you can see additional functionality according to that palette. So like clone source, we've got different options here. On our brushes, we have lots of options. So, there's a lot of hidden functionality in Painter. So I want to show you kind of, I guess, the most simplified way I know how to break down brushes in Painter, because we have hundreds and hundreds of brushes. We have airbrushes, we have artist oils, we've got erasers, we've got oils, and you've got even colored pencils. So people tend to get overwhelmed when they first start out and go, I have no idea what brush to start with. I kind of know what I want to paint, but where do I start? So the most simple way I know to explain this, I'll pick up my smeary round, is I'm going to break it down really simply. And this kind of goes with most brushes, maybe not all, but in general, you've got three subtypes of brushes. We have our round, and we can tell it's round because if you look at the dab on my brush, it's a circle. The beautiful thing about round brushes, in general, they tend to give you a lot of control, and they tend to be very, very feathery or soft. So where this translates in Painter is this is ideal for skin and hair brushes. Make sure that I'm not missing out anything here. There we go. Sorry about that. So the round brushes are phenomenal for skin and hair, or anything that you need a high degree of control over. On the flip side, Round brushes, because they're such detail brushes, are not so great for large background spaces or empty spaces. So if you think of the beach or sky or an indoor painted background, if you tend to use a round brush, it's going to look very photorealistic. So I would tend to stay with this with only for hair, fur, skin, little tiny details that you need a lot of control over. Now our next subtype of brush is a flat brush. So I'm going to pull up my Smeary Flat. This one actually came from Corel Painter 15. So a flat brush is basically an oval. You can see its oval head, and it's a very, very different brush. We have a moderate amount of control, a moderate degree of detail, but from end to end we have these very, very different marks. So it tends to be chunkier, it tends to be heavier. This is going to be more of your painterly brush. It's going to look very paintered, as people say. It's going to look very impressionistic. It's going to look less photorealistic. So ideally, this brush is phenomenal in areas such as clothing, jewelry, grass, flowers, anything but skin and hair. You can use this in skin and hair, but I would wait until you kind of master that round brush for skin and hair, because this one's a little bit more intermediate. But if you want something that's looser and more impressionistic, more expressive, pick up a flat brush. They're phenomenal. So I use this all the time in props, clothing. You know, if you've got a baby that's holding a bear, a teddy bear, the fabric, the chair, bouquets, bridal dresses, you know, everything goes. So heavier items will get the flat brush. Now the last brush I'm going to show is a shape-based brush. I'm going to pick up my Impressionist, one of the most popular brushes in Painter. And the Impressionist brush is like a stamp shape. It's a pattern. So the stamp brushes, or the shape-based brushes, tend to not give you a great degree of control, but they are phenomenal for adding texture in large spaces and small spaces, breaking up your lines, giving it a little bit of a painterly edge, and just adding a really nice degree of texture. So let me show you with one of my custom brushes. This one shows it really well. I'm going to find my beginner WebEx brushes. Let's go to 3. This one just shows it really well. So we've got a round, flat, and shape. Let me clear this out. Pull up another color. So here's our shape-based brush. You can see it's got a shape, so it's basically a stamp. And it fills up space very quickly. It gives us this mottled texture. It's phenomenal in big open spaces. So skies, clouds, indoor spaces. If you photograph a child against a blank wall, and for a painting you feel that blank wall is too boring, you're going to reach out for a textured brush or a shape-based brush. So what's really cool about this that Painter offers is shape-based brushes tend to show paper texture. And that paper texture is found over here in our toolbar. If we go to the very bottom, we get this default. I don't care for the default as much. It feels a little bit flat. So I tend to turn my paper texture to Artist Canvas, which is the third one down on the second row. So now, when we use this brush, you can see it's bringing up this beautiful canvas texture. And it's just delicious when you start painting these large empty spaces. Now keep in mind, I'm not really using this on skin and hair or areas I want a lot of photorealism. This is really your go-to break up the lines, break up the texture, add some paper texture to a large space brush. What's also neat is you can change this paper texture at any time and have a totally different look. So keep in mind when you use the paper texture and you keep tweaking this, that it does not retroactively, update these to the paper texture you're choosing. So it's a live paper texture. You can see all the different looks we're getting with these. So to stay safe and keep it easy, I like really keeping things very simple. I'm always on that artist canvas, regardless if I'm printing on paper or canvas. It just works really nicely. So those are really your three subtypes of brushes. So with that said, let's clear this out. Actually, let's close that up. So we're going to open up our image. Ideally, it's a lot easier painting images that have directional lighting versus images that have flat lighting, because then you get some more definition and detail in the skin. And this has got beautiful light and beautiful lines, and it's just gorgeous. So this is going to be perfect to paint. Now the very first thing we want to do is set up our document so we're able to clone. We're going to go File, Clone. And this is the most easiest way I know how to do it. It's a little different than what I teach in my tutorials, but that's just to save time. We're going to look at our layers palette, and I'm going to clear out this canvas. So we're going to do Control A, Command A, Delete, Command D. Or you can do Edit Select All, Delete, Edit Select None, or Deselect. So I take inspiration from Impressionists, and art history shows that Impressionists would ground their canvas with a color, meaning instead of starting with a white canvas, they would take their paint can, or the equivalent of our paint can, and actually put a color down first, so they'd be working on something more muted. So I'm going to do a few things here. We're going to take a look at our clone source palette. This guy is really important to keep open at all time, and I'll explain that in just a second. I'm going to drop this tracing paper to 0, and we're going to look at our original. We can look at it by toggling this bottom left-hand key, or the shortcut for that is Command T. So this is what's on, our document. This is what is a ghost of our tracing paper. So I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to pick just a nice soft color, and I'm going to eyeball it because we can't pick from a ghost. So I'm going to eyeball up here, get a nice warm tone, and I will tell you, after studying Impressionist stuff, their based or their grounded canvas colors were always in this section. Regardless of where you are on that color wheel, you know, hue-wise, saturation-wise, value-wise, you know, how light to dark, how saturated it is, they were always within this section. So this is your magic section. If you can pick a color from within there, you are good to go. So I'm going to pick that color. I'm going to touch my canvas and make sure that everything gets, let's try this again since I made a mess. Paint can and touch. So this will give us a really nice light paper to paint on. Now let's talk a minute about what the heck this clone source thing means, because this is what gets everybody caught up at first. So bear with me. I promise this will make sense. The clone source is going to tell Painter where we're loading our photograph from. So, you know, earlier we talked about you can paint in color, or you can paint with an image. We could paint in color, or click, paint with an image. But we need to be able to tell Painter where we're grabbing this image from. So this is called our reference file. And we tell Painter in that by going to our clone source palette. We say source, image, and it loads up that image for us. Now it did all of this when we originally hit File, Clone, and we had a duplicate of our document. So this is where this comes up. So this is the prepared, retouched, cropped, color corrected, the really pretty file that we're going to be using. And then we took our tracing paper to 0. So I would always recommend keeping that tracing paper to 0. So what the heck is a tracing paper? This kind of catches people. A tracing paper is a tool within Painter. All it is projecting your reference file onto your canvas. So see, we don't have any hidden layers. There's no layer of the little girl underneath. It simply is projecting our original image that we're cloning from, that we're grabbing all of our source information from, onto our palette or onto our document. It keeps it clutter-free. It allows you to look back and forth and go, okay, here's her hairline, here's where her skin starts. And then when we start getting into some of our crazier brushes, it will really help us make sure that things stay in place, like jaw lines, brow lines, the face looks good. So tracing paper is simply a projection of your clone source. Got it? Now, when we start to save, we're going to do File, Save As, and it comes up as Untitled because when I set it up, I said File, Clone, which makes a duplicate document. So I'm going to go find my original name, just so we can keep that in there. And my original name was this. And then in front, I'm going to put one PTR, and this just shows me it's the first stage in Painter using this as my reference file. Now we've got two different ways to save this. Really, it comes down to Riff or Photoshop. I don't use the rest. If you want to just stay in Painter the whole time and you want it to remember your clone source, you're going to save it as a Riff. However, I tend to do printing outside of Painter in Photoshop. So I'm going to keep this as a Photoshop file and click Uncompressed. So now we've got one PTR.psd. In the Photoshop file format, you can open it in Adobe products, you can open it in Corel products, so it's interchangeable. I'm going to hit Save. I'm going to watch Painter have a little bit of a hissy fit and say, wait a minute, this is not a riff. Are you sure you know what you're doing? I'm going to say yes. So the only downside to opening this up as saving it as a Photoshop is if we were to reopen that document. So say I've gone to bed, I'm letting Painter get her beauty sleep, and we reopen that document. So let's open up our painting. And we pull up a cloning brush. Let's clone. And all of a sudden, you'll see it really clearly here with my soft cloner. We get this. This is Painter's default uh-oh pattern. And that's just telling us that your clone source is not correctly attached. So remember, anytime we're cloning, we need to tell Painter what we want it to clone from. So if we look at our clone source palette, you see how it's empty? We need to reattach our prep file, our file that we want Painter to load its information from. So bottom left, open source. We've got to find the original file again. And here we are. So now we know we've done this correctly if we turn our tracing paper on and off. And there is our good file. So we would undo our lovely Hens and Chicks pattern. I'm just going to edit undo that, or Command Z. I'm going to keep my tracing paper at 0 at all times. And we are good to go here. So with all of that said, I've got some fun brushes here. We've got Impressionist, Impressionist Blender Jitter, Sargent Brush Tweaked. I put the word tweaked after them if I've taken a brush that came from Painter and then kind of, you know, made a little changes. So in the background with this, I'm going to use a shape-based brush. I'm going to look at my Impressionist, and I'm in clone mode right now, so we're only going to do a small portion of this image. Now this brush, let me hit reset. Okay, let's go to clone mode. So this is exactly how you're going to see it when you load the brush. It's kind of small, it's very scattered, that's just the brush build. We can resize that brush up here where it says size. And I'm a total shortcut junkie, so I find one of my favorite shortcuts on a Mac is Command Option, draw circle. And it automatically resizes according to that circle. So Command Option, draw a circle. If you're on PC, it is Control Alt, draw a circle. So we're going to messily paint in a lot of information back here. And I'm going to try to remember to keep some of my background color showing through, because that's going to be really pretty when we start blending. So I'm just kind of filling up for now. I typically always start on the background space, and I get a little messy, but then I tend to start building up more and more detail or more control over the image. But for now, I'm just kind of looking for my values. You know, what are my lights, what are my darks, and what do I essentially want to absolutely have in my painting. And this right here is driving me crazy. So let me just paint over top of it in color mode. Easily distracted. So let's go ahead and save this, do a file save as. We're going to name it 2PTR. So I'm sequentially going to be saving these. It's freaking out, it's not a riff. We say, okay, it's all right. Now, additional, I guess, customization to these brushes can be found on your settings bar when your brush is selected. So these change with each brush because each brush is built a little differently. We had the size. The next guy over is opacity. And opacity is just like most programs, it's how much coverage you're getting. So that's full 100% opacity, 10% opacity. We're going to be here all day with 10%. So I want you to think of opacity in terms of coverage. I'm going to keep that up nice and high, 100%. The next guy over we've got is something called Resat. And I'm going to show you with my round brush what this means. Smeary round. Resat, let me make sure this is, there we go. Resat is basically how much color or information you have loaded onto your brush. So at a very high resaturation, that's the equivalent of taking your brush, putting it in your paint can, and taking every ounce of paint on that brush. It is fully saturated. You've got tons of color, you've got lots of stuff on your brush. That's 100% Resat. On the flip side, if you put your Resat to 0, this is the equivalent of taking an empty paint can, going through the motions, and trying to load your brush up, but there's nothing in the paint can. So now this brush becomes a blender. Doesn't matter where you are on the color wheel, whatever you drop on is what it's going to pick up and blend. So you essentially can turn most of these brushes into a blender if you have the resaturation field. So Resat at 0 means there's no color on it, it's just simply going to blend. Resat at 100 means it's got pure color on it. Anything in between starts to mix those two. So to take it even a step further, we have what's called bleed. Bleed, you can see here, is at 0%. And what that's doing is it's not blending or playing well with others. A bleed at 100, however, means it is extra smooth, it's nice and feathery. Let me take my opacity down a little bit here. Bleed at 100%. And it starts blending really nicely with everything around it. So if you want an extra feathered brush, meaning it's going to blend really nicely with things around it, take your bleed all the way up to 100%. So those are just some little tiny things that you can do to customize Painter. The next guy we have is feature. And feature determines how scratchy or separated your bristles are. So I know I'm totally demolishing this painting here, but bear with me just a minute. So feature, let's pop that all the way up, is the space between your bristles, which determines how scratchy it is. So you can see it's very separated, very scratchy, very bristly. That's a high feature. A low feature, let's go to 2. Notice I didn't change anything else on my brush. It's the same exact brush. It's going to be 2. All of a sudden, because our feature is so low, those bristles compress together, and now it's a very, very solid turd. This is a turd brush. We don't like that. So to get something in the middle, let's put 9 in our feature. So 9, same exact brush, same sizes, different feature. So 20, 2, 9. So feature gives you control in how scratchy or separated you want your bristles to be. Now this is only on brushes that have bristles. So like for example, the Impressionist brush will not have a feature because it's a shape-based brush. There are no bristles. So now that I've made this huge mess, let's just clear that out. Take our paint can. I'm going to sample with my dropper tool, which is D. Take my paint can again and just fill that area and return back here. So I'm going to use my Impressionist a little bit more. And I'm making varying degrees of pressure. I'm using a Wacom Intuos tablet. It's a medium, And this one's actually an older one. It's my good old workhorse. I'm using the Intuos 4 on this machine. And I've also got the extra art pen that comes, it's an additional pen that you can get that just picks up swivel and tilt really well. So I'm trying to build up a lot of interest with texture in my piece before we start building in detail. So let's save another version, go to 3, and break this up a little bit more. And you can always turn this into a color brush, and the shortcut for that is U, so color, cloner, color. But I kind of like what it's doing so far, and I'm trying to make sure that I keep some of that background color showing through, because that's going to give you that impressionistic loose appearance. So let's start to kind of tighten this up. I'm going to take my Impressionist blender Jitter, and by the way, I found all these brushes in here. So I took some special brushes from the categories on the left, and I made my own custom palette. So when you start getting into Painter, you really like a brush, you can hold the Shift key down, and you see how it's got a little green thing by it? That means you can make your custom palette. And right-click on it, and you can say Show as Text. Of course, it's not doing it. There we go, Text View. So all of your brushes are found in your brush palette, just FYI. So I'm going to go to Impressionist Jitter Blender, and I'm going to look at my original by toggling, or I can hit Command-T for that shortcut. And I'm just lightly blending over top. I'm going in some random directions because the grass is kind of all over the place, and I don't want this to be a very stark or static image. So I'm just lightly pressing. These brushes are nice that if you give light pressure, you get a light mark. If you give a heavy pressure, you get a really, really heavy mark. I'm going to undo that. So let's show you some other brushes. I've got Sargent brush. I'm going to reset it so it shows exactly the way that you would see it. And this one's like a really heavy, crusty palette knife. It's got a little bit of jitter in it. So now we've got some nice texture. And this is really good for showing different planes. So we've got this nice bright patch here. Let's draw that in. And I'm cloning. So really all I'm having to worry about are my brush strokes. But because we're in clone mode, it's loading up the image for me, so I don't have to worry about my color. So it's a little jittery, a little scattered. And you'll notice I'm not obliterating all of the brushwork I did earlier. I'm just kind of layering pieces in. And the more we layer over top, the more we're going to bring up. So let's zoom out. Zoom back in. You can zoom out with your magnifying tool, or shortcut is Command plus and Command minus. Make some heavy marks here. And you see this brush is really expressive too. With a light mark, I get a thin motion. With a heavy mark, I get a fat brush. So depending on how you want it, you know, some of these brushes come built with a lot of expression in them, and you're only going to get that if you use a pressure-sensitive stylus. So if you're using a mouse, unfortunately, you're not going to see this. And it's really, really crucial if you're going to be working in Corel Painter to have a pressure-sensitive pen or tablet, because then you can get the full range of expression out of it. All right, let's save another version. Let's go to 4. And I found this brush, Impasto Cloner Jitter Etch, earlier. I'll show you what it does. Let me make sure we're on Reset. Ah, nuts. It's got the impasto in it. Let me take that out really quickly, and I'll make sure that does not remain when I send the brushes over to you. So I'm going to turn my impasto off. Okay, there we go. Just for this one, I don't want impasto to show. So I'm going to set that default. Say yes. So when you guys get the brush, you won't see that at all. So this one kind of gives you these little nuclei, little expression. I don't use it too much, but I thought it'd be kind of fun in here. So when we get those little blue marks, I don't know if these are blue bonnets. Judy can probably pop up in the chat box. But they're kind of good for the blue bonnets. Here we go. And let's go over. I'm going to pull up my soft cloner, zoom in, and go over her face, just so we bring back some of her face. So now we're going to start to get into kind of pulling up detail in certain areas. Let me save one more version. I save a lot of versions.
Heather,
So I'm going to pull up. Yes, ma'am.
while you're doing that, we've had quite a few people asking, is it imperative to save so many different versions? And, you know, is there a reason why you save different versions instead of saving over the copy you're working on?
Oh, good question. Yeah, absolutely. If you keep saving over your current version, you're only going to have one painting. And if you get really into it and 2 hours down the road, you just kind of look at it and go, I don't like what I've done, you're kind of stuck with it because you've only got one version of your painting. So I would recommend saving as many versions as your hard drive will allow you to, because, you know, say we get to a point where like, well, you know, I really liked my face before, but I love the background now. We can always bring in an older version of the painting into our clone source and clone from that. Plus, it's also really good to just kind of see how your painting progresses. So I would recommend, if you're just getting started, you know, do yourself a favor and save 5 versions of your painting. So every half hour, save a version. The more, the better, but I would not save just one version and that's it, because you're probably going to kick yourself later on because you may like something from an earlier version, or you may just hate if you have a bad day. So just save multiple versions in that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tanya. Okay, so let's try, we were saying earlier, or I was saying earlier, flat brushes are really good for kind of a medium amount of detail. So I'm going to pull up my, let's do the Real Dry Flat Tweaked. And I'm going to start moving towards closer to her and make kind of a test mark here. So this brush gives me a little bit of detail, but it's still fairly painterly. And I should tell you guys, if this were like a real world painting, I'd probably be spending a lot more time on it. But just to kind of get you started, I'm trying to move around and show you as many different areas to paint. Actually, you know what? Let's do Smeary Flat. This is one of my favorite brushes. Much better. Okay. So I'm using my Smeary Flat, making sure it looks exactly the way it will on your screen. And I'm making these small, make it a little smaller, grass marks around her. So nice vertical marks going back and forth. I am in clone mode because I don't want to have to freehand paint all of these blades of grass and all of their color shifts. So what the brush is doing is loading the brush with an image. And we're painting with an image in the style of this brush. So it's kind of filling in areas as I get closer to her. But it's looking nice and painterly. Let's go around. Ooh, we've got a nice little stream of light back here. Let's play that up. And I'm at a very, very heavy opacity at 100. So if this brush is too harsh for you, feel free to drop your opacity down. So if we dropped it, let's go to 40. It's a little softer, a little bit easier to manage. I just have a tendency to go with very aggressive, heavy brushes. Let's back up. Looking good. And I continue to play up this little light patch behind her. So it's a really nice glow. If I want to clean up any of the texture that I went overboard with, I can just lightly touch it with this brush. And again, this is that Smeary Flat Tweaked. I think if I could only have one brush to ever paint with, it would probably be a variant of this one, or variation. All right, so let's start getting into her because we don't have that much time left. And I'm going to look at my original. I don't want to get too caught up in detail with this dress, but I want to have it read. So the reader goes, okay, arm, waist, edge, knee, hand. So I'm going to take this brush and lightly make some random marks that are kind of following, the sleeves, the poofs. And again, the more time you spend on this and refining areas and really painting in those areas exactly where they fall, the more believable it's going to be. But for now, an hour is not that much time to really show you everything. So I'm going to show you a sleeve. We can get smaller. Got the edge of a sleeve, do a little bit of that arm. And I'm keeping it fairly impressionistic, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Get that belt. And again, I'm in clone mode, so I am painting with an image in the style of this brush. Let's get that edge. And I'm following the edge of that dress. I want to clean up right here. And you'll notice I'm clicking on my tracing paper on and off all the time at this point. The more you work closer into a person, or especially on the person, you really want to be toggling that tracing paper, which again is found right here. Or the shortcut to activate that is Command-T or Control-T for PC. So I'm going to just fill in some of these areas before we get into the face and hair. So now we've got a little bit more of an idea where, the sleeves are, where the knees are. And again, the more time I would spend on this, the more clearly that's going to read. So this is just a really quick way to show you how to get started with it. Let me hit save again. Now let me show you another brush. I've got two more brushes here that are kind of flat, kind of textured, that give a really nice look. So that was our Smeary Flat Tweaked. We have a Square Hard Pastel, which is a really cool brush. Let me hit reset so you can see it exactly how I will show it. So here's our brush. We're going to turn it to a cloner. And I'm going to start to break up some of the edges of this skin. Now this is at a really high opacity, so if this is too harsh, we can drop down our opacity. So let's try that. It's at 54 right now. Let's go to 30. And we're getting almost that impressionistic pastel look on the skin, which we're going to clean up with our round brush in just a second. But for now, we get this really nice edge. And remember, this brush is showing your paper texture, so make sure you're on a paper texture you like. I'm on that artist canvas. So let's back up. Looking good. We could even use it on the dress. We can use it to define edges. Define that sleeve. It's just kind of a fun overall textured brush. And it's also really nice for adding color. So if I wanted to add color, we would make it into color mode. Sample a color. I'm sampling by using my dropper, or D on the keyboard, and then quickly toggling back to my brush, or B on the keyboard. And we can hand draw some of these in. So if we've got a really nice highlight, got a nice highlight here, let's play that up. So sample, put a little bit more color in there. Got some nice yellows back here. Let's tweak that a little bit. And I'm going to drop my opacity to 10. So I'm just adding color manually at this point. All right. Let's add some white in there. Sample. Well, let's save first. Okay, so I've got one more brush to show you before we move into skin. And that is our Real Oils Filbert, which is a beautiful brush. This is what it does. It's a little scratchy, a little greasy, and I'm going to pick my color directly on here. I never touch these guys like you would in other programs. So I'm going to pick on the color wheel itself. And I'm going to start, I don't use this as a cloner brush. It doesn't work as a cloner. We're going to start outlining her hair. So I'm going to look for a bright color. And this brush, you kind of have to work back and forth to get it. Actually, you know what, let me show the round brush first, and then we'll use that to tweak it. So let's go into this round brush. We've got Smeary Round tweaked, and then we have its blender counterpart. If we put this in clone mode, let me hit reset. Every time I hit reset, that's showing the brush how it was last saved, so you guys can see it exactly how you'll get it when you open up this brush pack. I'm going to start cloning in marks with her hair. So again, I am loading my brush with an image, with a file, not with one color. And I'm painting it in the style of the brush. So I'm following, she's got this beautiful long soft hair. I'm following the pattern that hair is laying. And the brush is doing a lot of the work for me. So again, if this brush is too heavy for you, make sure that you take down your opacity. Because right now it is at 100, and I'm going to chicken out. Let's go down to 50. So now it's a softer brush. And when you have that background lighting or that directional lighting, and you've got like a kicker of that hair light, which is kissing right back there, this is so pretty to paint. And even if it's not there, you can add that with some brush marks. But it really gives some nice separation. Let's go a little higher, 70. And a perfect area to kind of lay in painterly brush marks. I'm going to take a smaller brush as we get into some of these sections. And I'm painting in back and forth motions. And you want to lift your brush a lot. If you just kind of scrub, it's going to look really muddy. All right, so let me make sure I'm saving. And now at this point, let's make some magic. Let's go back to that Real Oils Filbert. I'm going to sample this color, and I'm going to push it. Give it a little bit more oomph. Because we can see that light kisses behind her head right there. Fix this little background part. Fix that right there. I'm just sampling some of that background color and laying in a brush stroke. Push it. And this brush is kind of untamed. It's not super matchy-matchy, but I think that's what I love about it. So now when we zoom out, we can see we've got a really nice bit of light coming in from behind her hair. I'm going to take that square hard pastel and do the exact same thing. Give it about 40% opacity. I just want to build up this really, really pretty light that's happening behind her head. And you'll notice I'm changing my colors. I don't want to just pick white, or it's going to look like she's got a halo around her, and that's going to look unnatural. So I'm going to zoom out. I'm really, really liking how this is turning out. Okay, so let's do a little bit of skin in our last few minutes. I've got Smeary Round tweaked, and I'm going to put that in clone mode again. Just kind of as, I guess, a cheater tip. In your skin and hair, if you stick to your Smeary Round, you're going to be golden. It's great for cloning, it's great for adding color, and then if you take the reset down to 0, like I did for the Smeary Round blender, you can blend. So I'm going to make a test mark here. That's a little too scratchy for skin. And remember, scratchiness comes from feature, so we're going to boost that feature. It's 3.9 now. Let's go to 3. It's still too scratchy. Let's go to 2.5. That's better. All right, so here are my settings. Let me drop my opacity a little bit. Oh yeah, that'll work. So here are my settings for the skin on this one. And you know, your size is going to change all the time according to the size of your document and the size or the space of the face. And then your feature, I should note, because we've got this little blue mark check next to it, it means your feature is going to automatically resize according to your brush size. So if we make a bigger brush, my feature goes up. If I make a smaller brush, my feature goes down. So you really only need to set it once or twice. And I am painting in. I'm lifting all the time in her face. But I'm cloning in the large portions of her face, making rounder marks in the direction, if you think of them as forms or as planes. So you'll notice I'm not just trying to make marks for the heck of making marks. I'm really trying to stay within those areas. Because cloning is great, but it's not going to take all the guesswork out. You still have to be very cognizant of where your brush lifts, where it ends. So I'm just coming in really closely. Here we go. Let's add a little bit of color. And Judy, I'll send this over to you afterwards. Thank you so much for letting me use it. Okay, so I'm going to turn this into a color brush. I typically drop my opacity when I make it a color brush because I chicken out. So I'm going to make sure it's about 20%. And I'm going to enhance my values or enhance my colors. Values meaning light to dark. So I'm going to sample D for dropper, or right here. Now if I put down the same color, nothing changes. But if I exaggerate that color, we get a little tiny bit of difference. D for dropper, push it, put down a little mark. D for dropper, push it, put down a little mark. D for dropper, push it, put down a little mark. Let's go in that highlight area, D for dropper, push it higher. So now, all of a sudden, we get a little bit of variation in those skin tones. There's no guesswork because the colors are right in front of us. All we're doing is making sure that we're sampling and we're pushing or over-exaggerating that value. Now, you don't want to just pick white for the sake of being white and going highlight, highlight, highlight. It's going to look fake and cheesy, so that's not going to work. I'm going to do the same thing with my square hard pastel. Let's sample, go a little darker. That's a little too heavy, so let's drop our opacity. Sample, get a little saturation in there. And that's how I would continue to build up that image. So let me save another version, 9. At this point, are there any questions?
Yes, I have been furiously trying to keep up here in the Q&A panel.
Okay.
I may have missed a couple things that you were showing because of that, but
Okay.
I just wanted to let everybody know we've been asked a million times how are we going to get the brushes, and I will go ahead and email those along to everybody later today once I get them from you, Heather.
Awesome.
And then here's the questions. I try to have these in order so it'll make some sense. We had a beginner on that was wondering, would you recommend for a beginner to just jump in and play with the brushes or actually start by taking a course or watching some videos?
I would definitely just go ahead and start and playing with brushes. What helps with watching the videos is seeing kind of the behind-the-scenes setup, like with the preferences, make a huge difference in how your brushes react or how you physically see things on the screen. So I know that Corel's got an awesome channel at youtube.com/painter tutorials that you can watch that are free to help you get started. And then all the Painter Masters, I would say most of them put out tutorials. So it depends on budget and it depends on learning style, but you can't go wrong with the tutorials. They're worth every penny. And they just fast track your learning curve. So.
And we have a lot of them that you created. So I was telling people that you did a whole series of beginner photo art. So I'll remind everybody of that when I email. As far as prepping your photos before you bring them into Painter, do you do a lot of adjustments? And
I
would you
do.
recommend doing that?
Oh,
I mean, I would recommend doing that first, right, before Painter.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, the more work you can do on a painting before you get into Painter, I feel like you can have more fun just painting it. So I would recommend doing any retouching, cropping, sizing, black point compensation, all of that stuff I do in Adobe Photoshop just because of their healing brushes and all of that. And I actually over-sharpen images before they come into Painter, because essentially the more you blend in Painter, the more you're flattening it out. So I'll just give it a little bit of a punch with sharpening, but I never just take a camera raw file and go straight to Painter. So you want to work in 8-bit TIFFs or JPEGs, high-res JPEGs.
Okay, great. And do you have a recommendation on the size of the file, the dimensions?
Ooh, good question. Keep in mind what you want to print. So let's look at the canvas size for this. We've got a pixel count of 3600 by 2400. Assuming that the capture was really good, great lighting, nice and sharp, the most simplest way to look at this is if you move the decimal point over 2 points. The largest we can go with this is a 36 by 24. So I actually try to bring in images to paint at 300 dpi because that's what most labs require. I didn't realize I kind of biffed on this and let it be at 32. I'm sorry, 72. So like when you're prepping in Photoshop, if you need a 16 by 20, you need to make sure you have 1600 by 2000 pixels. So when you would open that image size and see those pixels, at the bottom it shows what resolution do you want it to be. So you would just put 300 in there and keep your pixel size the same. I've got a document that shows that I will post on YouTube because it makes a lot more sense than me just talking about numbers. So let me make a note. I'm happy to post that on my YouTube channel on sizing.
That would be great.
Yeah, sure.
And then we had quite a few questions because you do a lot of flipping with the full image with the tracing paper rather than using opacity. And is there any reason why you work that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I find I get really caught up in the process. So if I know that toggling back and forth between my tracing paper shows me all of one thing or all of the other, then I know this is my painting. This is my reference. This is my painting. What happens is if we start tweaking our percentage that's showing, say we go back to that 50, and we turn it off for a second, and we look at it and go, well, which part's my painting, or how much of this is painted? It gets a little confusing. So I'd rather see all or nothing, meaning all of the reference, all of the painting, versus an opacity that's kind of showing a little mix of both, because it's not going to print like this. I want to see it exactly how it's going to print, which would be at 0% opacity. So I would just not even think of the opacity, just turn it to 0 and look at it as tracing paper, canvas, okay. Tracing paper, canvas.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
There was a couple questions. What I'm probably going to do is I'll take some of the questions that were asked numerous times and I'll put them in the email along with the brushes and everything. One thing that I didn't ask you yet is do you always save to PSD? I was not noticing while you were working, or were they RIF files?
These are all PSD just because I'll go back into Photoshop afterwards when I go print. If you're not, if your end game is Painter and you want to print from Painter, then saving a RIF is perfectly fine. But the RIFs will not open up in Photoshop, which is why I save them as Photoshop documents.
Okay. And one last question, because I want to respect your time and everybody else's.
Sure.
Anything. I think we got to most of the questions in here. But like I said, the ones that I didn't, I'll email them. And let's see, as far as the brushes that they're going to get, we have people on different versions of Painter. So they're wondering, I don't know how many brushes have 2016, 2015 technology in them. Will they be usable in earlier versions?
Unfortunately, no. The brushes I've pulled were all from 16, so they're only going to be working with 16.
Okay.
Yeah, if you've got earlier versions, there are some brushes similar, but I made a lot of tweaks just so we wouldn't
Okay,
have
well
like an
that's,
hour on brush tweaking. Yeah,
yeah,
sorry. So you're gonna have to upgrade.
that is fair. So I will just remind everybody of that when we send the brushes. And I have 3 lucky winners here. I don't want to forget about
Woohoo.
this. So
Yes.
for your backgrounds, Yvonne
Yep.
Carter, you are a winner. And Rob
Woohoo.
Wells also won Heather's backgrounds. And
Awesome.
April Peebles won Painter 2016. So I'll be sure to
Oh,
follow up with
wow.
everybody after this. And I can't thank all of you enough for coming. And Heather, this was outstanding. I'm going to sit and watch it
Yay,
back
thank you.
just to refresh myself on some of these techniques because it's pretty
Awesome.
amazing what you do in such a short period of time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And if you guys have not done so, I highly encourage you to go to my site. It's www.heatherthepainterstore.com. And if you click on subscribe and subscribe to my online newsletter, I have made special coupon codes. They're actually really, really generous for all of the stuff on my store. So make sure you subscribe for that. If you're already on the newsletter, it will come to you. But heatherthepainterstore.com. And, you know, I love to see you guys on Facebook and see what you're posting and try to answer any questions.
And we would love to see any of the work that you do, you guys. We also have Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram. So tag Corel Painter because I would love to see all the work from everybody. All right. Well, it's 3:05 now, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and turn off the webinar here. I have recorded everything, so I'll get this up on Painter Tutorials on YouTube a little bit later today. And I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Thanks again, Heather.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Happy painting.
All right. Bye.